Welcome back, students. In this video, we're going to be talking about assembling our products. Specifically, we're going to walk through the process of finding out how many materials we used during our production. Whenever we're doing production, we're converting a number of different raw materials into our finished product. What happens in this process is that costs transfer from the raw materials into the final finished product. We have to track all of these little details and all of these little changes because these numbers impact how our business operates. Before I delve into it, I want to acknowledge that I'll be covering a lot of specific details and processes in this video. Don't get intimidated by it. You made it this far for a reason. If you exercise consistent input, you won't have a problem tracking any of what I'm about to talk about. This means making sure you note down all the details whenever you have a production session. Anyways, as we were talking about, you as a production department have to keep track of all the raw materials as they're translated into finished units. This means accounting for all of the raw materials you purchase, all the raw materials you used, labeling the finished goods, as well as tracking the costs all across the board. Every single thing is tracked. Every raw material, every finished unit, every single cost, these are all things that we're going to note down. This process really is straightforward so long as we have that attention to detail, consistent record keeping, as well as good habits as I mentioned before. Let's start off by getting the big one out of the way, which is determining our costs. You might remember during the value proposition exercise as well as the break-even analysis, we determined a cost per unit. This value was perfect for our needs at that time. But in reality, it was just an estimate that we used to make the basic initial decisions. When you're actually out there producing and your company is operating, the costs are dynamic, which means they change day by day. Think about it. You won't be purchasing all of your raw materials on day 2 of your company. You're going to be buying more and more as you continue to operate and as your needs change. Because you're going to be buying your raw materials at different points in times, that means the price that you're paying for these raw materials is subject to change. What something costs today might not be the same amount it will cost tomorrow. This fact is the reason we're tracking our cost information the way we are, as opposed to just doing one cost one time and applying it for the rest of the program. Again, I want to reiterate that having this cost information is fundamental for the rest of your company. We use this value in a lot of different calculations in a lot of different departments. So although it might be tempting to take a shortcut, I encourage you to do the whole process. To cleanly see and manipulate all of our data, we're going to use a table. Now every raw material that we have will get its own unique table. Each raw material table will be further broken down into 3 segments: purchase material, used material, and then your current balance. Under each of these segments, we're looking at the cost and amount of our raw material through a different lens. Remember what I said before, when you purchase a raw material, you won't be buying the same amount and you won't be paying the same amount every single time. And once again, because of this difference, we want to make sure we're looking at things separately so we can accurately calculate our costs. This difference is also why we want to keep our different purchases separate on the table. We're going to use the first in, first out method, which means we want to completely deplete any old raw material before we start using any newer ones. I'll start off by explaining the first segment. When we buy a raw material, we're going to write that down in the purchases section. When you go out to buy something, you know how much you're paying for it and you know how much of that you're going to receive. These 2 information bits are going to be written down in this table. I'll illustrate this with an example. When I go out to Staples or Costco, I know that I can pay $10 and in return I'll receive a pack of 100 sheets of paper. From these 2 numbers that we know during a purchase, what we can do is calculate the cost per unit of that raw material. Using that paper example, I know the $20 I paid can be divided amongst 100 sheets that I received, meaning that 1 sheet of paper in that pack will cost me 20 cents. Sometimes doing this cost per unit calculation will give you a very long decimal. And it's important that we don't round this off just yet. We only want to round it off at the end because we want the most accurate numbers for our final amounts. So that's how we fill out the purchase segment. I'll move on to the second one, which tracks our usage. We're calling this one produced. That means whenever you're doing production, you have to either count how many you're making, or you can count your total amount purchased before and after, and whatever the difference is how much you used. We've already calculated the cost per unit, and now that we know how many units we use, we can find the total amount that we used during that one production session. I'm going to go back to the paper example. At the start of my production session, I did a quick count and I still had 100 sheets of paper. At the end, I counted again and I had 80 left, which means I used 20 sheets of paper in that production session. I would multiply this 20 sheets used by the 20 cents that I know each paper costs to get the total amount that I used in that production session. Lastly, I'll talk about the balance segment. This essentially shows us how much of a purchase we have left. So it's the purchased amount minus any amounts that you might have used. That's your balance. We use that final amount once again to make important decisions and to gauge where our company is at with certain raw materials. Examples of decisions that you would make is determining whether or not you need to buy more of that specific raw material. Alright, so now we've tracked all the raw materials we used in a production session, and we also did the calculations to determine the costs of all those raw materials. After you're done a production session, you'll also know how many total units you made. The important metric that we want to walk away with is cost per finished unit. How much does your final tangible unit cost to make? That's what we want to know, and that's why we do all of this work with the raw material tables. Since you've done the hard work of tracking the amounts you used as well as the costs associated to them, all you got to do to finish this part off is add up the total amount of raw material you used on a certain production day. You then divide this by the amount of units you produced. On a side note, I wanted to say that if during production you wasted material, you lost it, or you ruined it by accident, that's okay, it happens. I wanted to say though that any wasted costs that you calculated aren't added into the final cost per unit. Nice. What we now have in front of us is a whole lot of different finished units and a bunch of information about the costs associated with them. What we want to do now is distinguish each of these unique units. Again, they can be sold separately at different prices, so we're going to be accounting for them different. This is us helping out the finance departments as well as the sales and marketing departments. Your company is going to create a system of labeling each unit. So this could be directly writing on the unit, this could be having some sort of sticker system, or whatever other organizational method that your team wants to use. To wrap it all up, what we're going to do is write down in a separate table, not the complicated raw material one, but a separate table, all of the labeled units we have as well as the costs associated with them. This information is then passed off to the sales and marketing department for their own uses. Okay, I'll admit, there's a lot of moving pieces in this one. But this process isn't any different than what we've done so far in the sense that it becomes easier the more you practice and do it. So be patient with it. Explore the examples and ask your mentors to help you out if needed. This also extends to your teammates because all of you are working together to get this vital information for your team. So sit down, lay out all of your different raw materials, and start doing the math to figure